Hello and welcome to the Inside Intelligence webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program and the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on China's campaign to steal America's secrets. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Inside Intelligence playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Michael Ord, Program Director for the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Welcome everyone to Inside Intelligence. And today we welcome back David Arshad for his discussion on China's ongoing attempts to acquire American intelligence and intellectual property. We spoke with David. It was on the ODNI. But he's here to talk about China, and he had served in the U.S. government in a wide variety of national security and intelligence positions for nearly 33 years. He was Deputy Director of Policy for the Director of National Intelligence from May 2007 to August 2010, and he previously held positions in the Office of the ODNI, White House National Security Council, the CIA, and U.S. embassies abroad. In August 2014, he was appointed Acting Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and until his January 2015 retirement from government service, he led a workforce of more than 16,000 military and civilian employees worldwide. As an independent national security consultant, David now collaborates with several international missions and NGOs and serves on 8 boards, including the Board of Trustees for Geneva College and Patrick Henry College. He's the author of the recently released HarperCollins published book, The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets, and that's what he's going to be talking about today. David, welcome, and I know you've been getting a lot of good attention on this topic. Please kick us off. What is China doing to our secrets?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for having me back, and thank you to your audience that has tuned in on this very, very critical topic in terms of America's national security and the threats that China poses to it, which has me set a setting or a context that takes us back to a late spring, June 1984 speech, which was seminal by Deng Xiaoping. This is 5 years, just for additional context, 5 years before Tiananmen Square occurs in June of 1989, in which Deng Xiaoping, to a Japanese audience, whether coincidentally or not, it's not clear, made very clear, however, in his flowery Mandarin language, that China was going to embark and was in the process of embarking on a coexistence between a single party state known as the Chinese Communist Party, of course, as we know it today, which of course was part of the legacy coming out of 1949 and the Long March under Mao Zedong. And it was going to coexist with Chinese version of managed capitalism. So just again, I think this is important to level set around what the Great Heist is today, because its origins really began in 1984 in this seminal speech, as I mentioned. Throughout the following decade of the 1990s, the US, and by extension the West more generally, was fixated on getting China into the World Trade Organization, which that ascendancy into the WTO occurred in December of 2001. During that decade, however, we were seeing the manifestations of Deng Xiaoping's speech, which would go on to be carried out by Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin, and of course now Xi Jinping in China under the CCP, which was piracy. The decade of the 90s were known for anyone in this audience and beyond that went to China, you would see knockoff products, low tech, for those who can remember VHS tapes and Betamax and all of that, but fake Rolexes and fake Levi's and all the rest that were out on the sidewalks and the wares of any major city, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and elsewhere. And all of that occurs before the WTO. The reason I give you the 1984 speech as well as the 1990s in terms of a projection of where we are today is China has never really hidden its intentions. Because around the context of the Great Heist and the grand larceny that has taken place of our intellectual property of today was a mantra or a contextual piece for the Chinese, and particularly the CCP, that they were coming out of a century of humiliation. It was a century in which China argued that they were suppressed and oppressed in terms of the Middle Kingdom and the grandeur of China's history and all of that by the West. And these go back to the Opium Wars and all of that. The book does not get into that history. Those many other books have been written on that. But that's the context for something that had started to occur really 2 to 3 decades ago in earnest when it comes to the taking of intellectual property and really the unfettered access that the WTO gave to China as a most favored nation status to come into the US and other Western markets with their goods. Now, we somewhat laugh at the late 1990s, and then certainly as it took off after WTO in 2001, that these were cheap goods. They were goods that quality-wise were mediocre at best and all that. And if you bought in China type of product, you kind of go, well, is that the best you can do type of thing? Meanwhile, and there were a couple of instances in the book gets into a brief explanation of some of the intellectual property that was taken from the Chinese of American Motors AMC Corporation of the Jeep, and they replicate that. They take a Russian-made SU version of an aircraft and they steal that. But the problem for the Chinese is they couldn't operationalize what they were taking. They couldn't, the machinery didn't work. And this is again through the 1990s. I highlight this, Michael, because many of us say, when and how did this begin? And how did we miss it? We missed it because it was right in front of us and it was hiding in plain sight. Deng Xiaoping's speech, and there were other speeches, obviously, that followed, but those were historic in the sense of designing the direction of China and where it was going to go. You usher in then the 2000s, and this is important for the audience to understand. We are distracted, and I don't mean that in a pejorative or demeaning way whatsoever, after 9/11 with the global war on terror. You and I, Michael, were a part of an intelligence community that pivoted dramatically to tactical intelligence in support of the warfighter because of Afghanistan and subsequently in 2003 in Iraq, and then really finding these terrorist planners, whether it be Al Qaeda, be it eventually ISIS, in the caves or in their planning cells, wherever they might be globally, and preventing an attack like we had seen on 9/11. All the while, China's just moving along. It's just moving along this pathway of getting better at what they were stealing from the standpoint not only what they were acquiring, as they began to have this whole idea of a recruitment of 1,000 talents. It's the whole idea of finding expertise in the areas that they are looking for. You semi fast forward to 2012 and 2013 while Xi Jinping consolidates his power as the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, but also over the PLA, as we've seen recently, with the PLA's purges of General Zhang in the CMC, and so you've seen Xi's sort of in action now for 14, 15 years in terms of the impact. But here's the next seminal event. He kicks off the Made in China 2025 and 2015. As your audience undoubtedly knows, China loves plans. They like strategic plans. They're centrally planned. These are what you and I would have called in the day the requirements process for civil military fusion in the case of China. How would the PLA modernize the People's Liberation Army, Air Force, Special Forces, Rocket Forces, Space Forces, by the way, now, and their Navy as well. How are they going to modernize? Well, it's this Made in China 2025. In that plan, Xi lays out 10 collection priorities, all of which we would all recognize, ranging from electric vehicles, green energy writ large, the bio sector, biopharma, artificial intelligence. It was in the nascent days in 2015, of course, as we know, in terms of where it was going to go. There, obviously, the semiconductor sector in terms of the chips that they need for Huawei and ZTE. All I say that is an illustrative aspect of this acceleration, which now has led to the greatest illicit wealth transfer in history. And the book really lays this out. The Great Heist lays out and connects the dots, if you will, in this collectivism around a whole of society to go after these things in the West and in the United States in particular. How? The how is best described in the way that the Ministry of State Security, which is their security apparatus that combines something resembling CIA as a foreign collection agency, along with the National Security Agency and the signals intelligence, the cyber security, so cyber command and cyber capabilities of NSA, their domestic security, so the equivalent of course, the FBI, all in one. From about 2012, 2013 to about 2016, 2017, and as the audience can well imagine, getting statistics on these things is difficult to get. But the estimate is that during that time, an MSS grew by about 150,000 to be about 300,000 today. Specifically within the Ministry of State Security that I just described, which is the execution arm, the principal execution arm. It doesn't mean that the PLA doesn't have DIA equivalents that go and do defense-specific things, but the favored son by Xi Jinping is the MSS. That MSS collection plan is set out in Made in China 2025. That's the main thing. And so the objectives are set out. They don't tell the MSS how to go collect it. It tells them this is what we need for this military civilian fusion that we have. Now you then insert a couple of very critical intelligence and cyber related edicts. I almost use the Freudian slip of saying passage of laws. In China, the Communist Party passes it. There isn't a congressional process, so they don't have the benefit of what we watch every day with our Congress and Senate in terms of the debates and all that. They pass a cybersecurity law in 2016 that accompanies this collection effort in where there is a caging, as in putting in a cage, the cyber capabilities and cyber knowledge of foreign investors in China. You can't take it offshore. That's among the various things. But far more deleterious and far more far-reaching, in my opinion, was the National Intelligence Law passed in 2017 And again, it's a euphemistic passage of law. What I'm really talking about is an edict from the CCP. And for your audience and for you, Michael, not to get wonky in legal terms, Article 7 is the critical element of that. And the book goes into this in some detail because it's important. Article 7 requires not if desirable or giving any leeway to saying no without consequences, requires every Chinese citizen at home and abroad, along with every Chinese entity. So think of ByteDance still with 19.5 ownership of TikTok to cooperate with the Chinese government. There is no separation. This is the whole of society. This is the story of the Great Heist by way of the mechanisms and the channels by which they accomplish it. We cannot get hung up as, well, it's more about cyber than it's human penetrations, than it is by volunteers, they're all a composite picture of this intelligence program of which the MSS Bureau 18, which is focused on the United States, has unlimited resources. For all intents and purposes, it has unlimited resources. But in addition to that, they're organically self-contained. So think of it this way. Some of you may have heard, and it's the Microsoft terminology or nomenclature of the Typhoon attacks. You have Salt Typhoon, you have Volt Typhoon. Salt Typhoon, not to oversimplify it, is the cyber intrusions into our telecommunication systems. So your AT&Ts and Verizons at a metadata level. It doesn't mean they're in every person's phone now that has a Verizon subscription or AT&T, but rather it's in the switches. It's the ability to detect activities, as we would call the metadata that's created by our usage of our electronic components. Volt Typhoon is very different. It has an overlap with the telecommunications, but now it's more insidious. It's insidious enough to have kill switches in it.
Mhm.
Volt Typhoon is the penetration into our infrastructure, water, electric grid, the smart city systems, whatever they have been able to penetrate, that in a time of conflict, and I mean active war conflict, kinetic war conflict, or it might be over Taiwan, let's say, in terms of our response to it, in terms of how we respond, would have kill switches to bring down GPS, to bring down the electric grid, to bring down. That's what. So they sit there. Now, finding them, and obviously that's the job of CISA and other U.S. government entities and the private sector to identify and to thwart these penetrations. But just to give you an idea, Salt Typhoon is in 80 countries. It's not just the United States in terms of the telecommunications penetration. So you have the instruments now identified, and they range from talent all the way through to and when I say talent, finding that talent in the advanced sciences, the advanced engineering. And the book lays out in some detail that, again, in connecting these stories around a systematic or systemic campaign to go after these 10 requirements that are inside the Made in China 2025, independently of the tools that are used to do it. In other words, it might be joint research, as I tell in the story of the 150, 60 Chinese scientists and engineers that are at Los Alamos. Imagine this, Michael. Los Alamos, the cradle of the Manhattan Project 75, 80 years ago, in terms of what it did, having Chinese nationals side by side doing what? Getting the kind of experience and research associated with wind tunneling. Now that's a head scratcher. Why would I be interested in wind tunneling to go back to China to do what? It's August 2021, and China does the hypersonics test. Guess where they got the wind tunneling expertise?
Mhm.
So to be very clear, we're not talking about someone opening up the back of a van or a trunk of a car and putting a hypersonics package in there. But the
Right.
know-how, the research was done there. In other instances, they simply steal all the R&D and take it and put it into whatever system that they're looking for. And the cover of the book is very revealing, and I'll just hold it up. You have essentially what we call today a digital twin of the F-35 and the FC-31. The F-31 cost Northrop Grumman, one of the U.S. major contractors in the defense industrial base, about $100 million, at least that's their professed open number, to redo the stealth related software pertaining to the F-35, which was stolen by the Chinese. Not the design of the plane. That was a whole other heist.
That's right.
I'm talking about the internal workings of the software for stealth technology. So you think what the audience needs to understand, the consequences of these are somewhere between dire and cataclysmic because the capabilities which Chris Wray, the former director of FBI, put 3 or 4 years ago at about $600 billion of annual intellectual property value heist out of the United States alone. That's 2/3 of the Pentagon's budget, just for orders of magnitude. And that's probably underreporting because a lot of companies don't like
Yep.
to report that they've been had, whether
Right.
through cyber or whether through a human penetration. They don't report it to the Bureau. They don't file a claim, if you will, around what's been taken. And so these are manifestations of what China has and continues to do. And I'll stop with the following. Xi Jinping has extended Made in China 2025 to 2030.
Mhm.
His intent, and I'm not saying he will achieve it, but certainly the intent is to double the PRC's total GDP economy of about 19 trillion in 2020, which was 1.3 trillion when they joined the WTO in December of 2001, doubling it by 2035. And just for orders of magnitude, again, the US is at about 28 trillion in terms of size of GDP. So I'm using constant numbers across all of this when I say those. So it's the real numbers for 2001 to 2020 in real terms, and then 2035 in terms of doubling it in the US GDP. This means they are on the cusp of really overtaking us and already have in some instances of technology. The race is on that everyone hears about in terms of artificial intelligence. I believe nightmare scenarios are that they break out faster than we do on quantum, on biotech, in the areas of the end-to-end production of the research all the way through to production of pharma. And I could go on and on in terms of that. I think where they did not make their goals by 2025 with their 2015 plan was in semiconductors. And this is where you get this debate on NVIDIA and the H200s versus the H20 chips, what gives them a comparative advantage if they get them or don't get them. It's a healthy debate to have, but in the end, don't think you're so special that you'll be able to protect it. They will take that and reverse engineer virtually anything that they have. As one pundit said to me, they'll steal the buttons off your shirt if that's what they need. I mean, this is unconstrained by values or by anything that would say right or wrong about what they're doing internally on their side, but rather it's all hands on deck, going after whatever they can get in terms to manifestly do their PLA modernization, which is well underway in terms of potential areas of supremacy, certainly in the Taiwan context, and the fears that Japan and South Korea might have. In the near abroad of China when it comes to the Southeast and South China Sea. So those are That's the context that I think your audience needs for the book. The rest are stories about how they are achieving this in more specific terms. And then what do we do about it? But I'll leave that to your question or anywhere you want to take this conversation now that I've spoken enough as an opener.
Thank, thanks, David. I do have a couple questions, and I'd like to turn over the questions to our audience. But one of the more startling statistics in the book was by an Australian think tank talking about their belief that China is actually ahead of the West in 37, I think, was out of
Yes,
44 critical areas of technology. That I don't know exactly what year they said that, but it was recent.
it's
Um,
2024. Yeah.
so this is really this is we're way farther into this than I think many Americans really believed. That one of the things that struck me from the book was, in a sense, the belief, and probably we said the same thing back with the Japanese, was, oh, it's not, this is a junkie car now, we're not worried about it, and now look what they've done. And the story about Tesla, maybe it's worth mentioning it, David, because I think it's sort of, it seems like the way you frame it in the book, that seems like a model for how we progressed, really underestimating their capabilities, and then they exceeded where we were.
I would give you three sort of profiles of Americans' views toward China and what you describe. And they range from views on Main Street, as I call it, or we would say in the public square, all the way to Wall Street and in the investment circles of private equity and venture capital and that side of it. The first is, and it's captured in the thumb drive, the $1 billion thumb drive on
Mhm.
autopilot that was taken by Mr. Kao while Elon Musk on Tesla was breaking ground in Shanghai in January of 2019, with ink deals in the summer of 2018, in which, in a very, very unusual arrangement with the Chinese government slash Chinese Communist Party, the agreement was given by the Chinese to Elon Musk of 100% ownership in China. The vast, vast majority of arrangements are joint venture 51 Chinese percent versus 49% external investor, independently of where it originates from. And so that $1 billion heist is a great example of hubris. That's the first sort of category. The hubris is really about this idea that I can always stay ahead of them. And that's not a statement about Elon Musk's personality. That's not degrading in any way, shape, or form, but rather my ability to innovate and to bring into the market unforeseen developments will always stay ahead of the competition. What's so interesting is that you have in the the investments made into China, the underwriting for a number of technologies that now, including in the EV market, BYD is by far the number one global seller of vehicles, and Tesla has fallen way behind in terms of Tesla production versus BYD, and there are many others, X and other auto producers. Second type of person is the person I put them in the category, it won't happen on my watch. I know it happens. Maybe also in that category, it's the one not only not on my watch, they don't really care about little old me. The book points out they don't stop because of size of company, that you have to be a Fortune 500 that I'm going to go after. You may have exactly the one piece of technology they're looking for in a very small area, a small company, or R&D associated with it, and they'll go after it. So this idea, and that not on my watch, I live for quarter on quarter, maybe even annual on annual earnings in my corporate structure, and it won't happen to me. So if I can get out of the Chinese attacking me while I'm there, I've done well. I've avoided it. I know they do it, but not during my watch. The third one, and I think there's a non-statistical statement when I say a majority of Americans have not put this all together, and they're just sort of naive about it. Why? Because they buy China products, made in China products, um, in Walmart and Target and all the rest, and consumer goods and all of that. We're not even talking about that in the book. We're talking about the crown jewels that you want to protect for national security reasons. You want to talk about the research and development that will advance them at our expense, that are truly zero sum. If they get it, we don't. That sort of thing. And so to me, those are sort of the three categories of people. The book aims to speak to all three of them. So the one who thinks they can stay ahead of it are going to be surprised because no one has. The
Mhm.
one who says, not on my watch, you're playing a Russian roulette game. I mean, so it's okay for your next CEO to have it happen to him or her. And then the other one is simply education. Is really the Select Committee on Intelligence under now Representative Molinar and formerly Mike Gallagher, in terms of leading that, is the educational piece that we realize what China is doing to us. And I think that's really the thread or the thematic that really flows through the book.
But it's difficult, isn't it? Because we had, for example, the China initiative at DOJ, and it, at least from what I was reading, it sounded like it was making some progress on prosecutions, but then it was shut down. So can we sustain as a country a policy of basically counterintelligence, counterespionage against this threat?
Can we sustain it? No, not long term. Clearly, there would be, if and God forbid, a hot war of some sort, kinetic wise, and they're able to disable our capabilities as a result of their capabilities technologically in that? No, the answer is no. What we have never seen, Michael, is this, as I've already mentioned, the greatest illicit wealth transfer in human history. We've also never seen this whole of society application of military civilian fusion.
Mhm.
In other words, the barrage of economic espionage pales in comparison to the Soviet era that I worked in there early into the 1980s, before the collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991. And that's really important to understand. The scale and scope of this requires a different DOJ law enforcement counterintelligence approach. And that is really lowering the bar of what constitutes national security threats. Look, we've done it on counterterrorism. We define a counterterrorism act at a pretty low bar,
Right.
threat to, and you can fill in the blank. Well, we need to do the same thing in the economic espionage area. We're not talking about one-offs. This isn't, this is at a scale we have never seen before, and that special unit that was in DOJ, very disappointingly was brought down in 2020, but it also hasn't been restored. And so
Right.
part of the driver here is to get the administration to think and really get ahead of this in a material way, so that our law enforcement people, FBI agents, counterintelligence folks that are working this, really have all the tools available, like the counterterrorism people do, on this economic industrial espionage at scale. And today they simply don't. And I've talked to the judiciary committees on the Senate side. What is it that you could do to do it? But there needs to be leadership on the executive side in terms of doing that.
Let's talk a little bit. Well, let's get to some questions from our audience, and there's a number of questions. Thank you, David. You mentioned early on, what about the learning gap that the Chinese had early on? I think you quoted from our former director of counterintelligence mentioning the 85-30 rule. It seemed like that how
Yeah.
they were approaching it, and then eventually how they caught up.
Yeah, Bill Evanina is who you're talking about,
Right.
and just a national hero from my standpoint in terms of counterintelligence. Led the intelligence community's National Counterintelligence Center for a number of years, senior FBI counterintelligence agency. By the way, it's a real plug for the FBI, which oftentimes was competing with CIA. So I can say really nice things about Bill and what the FBI's done. That 85-30 rule was something, the quality being at 85% of the US manufactured or Western manufactured at 35% the cost. And so this mass production of which China owns somewhere on the order of about 28% of the global manufacturing capability. It's massive. And so this idea that you're going to beat them on price, so to speak. And the book gets into how Amazon lists the used car parts and all that that are at a fraction of the cost of a US manufactured car part, simply because of labor market costs and all that, but also because in part the Chinese subsidize. Remember, the fusion is that all of them work for the CCP. They may not on a daily basis give their reports to the CCP, but they're all responding to the CCP requirements process. And so this idea that when they need a subsidy for what they're doing as a sector or as a major company that might be going under because of external competition, there's the CCP ready to buck them up, ready to come in and underwrite the capabilities of that company. And so there is no independent Chinese company. That's what has to be clear. And so this idea that it's fair in terms of the level playing field on this production rule that Mr. Evanina talked about is almost a fool's errand. We can't make it up there. So you have to go to the side of what is it that you want to protect at all costs.
Mhm.
The book is not about shutting down Chinese trade at Walmart
Right.
or basic manufacturing. That's a fool's errand. That would be total decoupling from China. The global market would collapse
Right.
with that sort of approach. This is about identifying both in corporate and in the U.S. government. What are those trade secrets? Those really gems in the crown jewels of the crown that you're wishing to protect, that you will at all costs protect. I'll give you one very quick example. It's this whole idea of classifying this sensitive research around these crown jewels much, much sooner, because today, in large measure, R&D doesn't get classified till there's an application to using it. In
Mhm.
other words, if you're doing R&D through one of the national labs or doing it through academia or some combination thereof, it doesn't get classified today. It gets classified once it goes into the F-35. Well, they stole it before, though. So
Right.
you have to start much earlier in protecting your really core secrets when it comes to your industrial base much sooner. That's the response of it. It's not about dealing with cheap goods that you're not gonna win on that front.
One of our listeners asks about the role the media has played. Have they changed over time in raising perception, or do you still think there's a lag there?
There's a lag, although it is in the process of changing. Um, I like to say, as a former adjunct professor for 8 years in the study of our intelligence community from 1947 and the National Security Act to present day, the community never changed absence a crisis or a major failure. And sometimes the failure was the crisis. But so you have Iran-Contra in the 80s, or you have enhanced interrogation techniques, and there's these tectonic changes around it. Those tectonic changes haven't come with China yet. And I fear that the media in that is not that they're naive again in these three categories that I described, knowing that it happens, but they don't holistically, although I have to say Bloomberg has done a very good job in some of their work on sort of the collectivism around the espionage by the Chinese. I'm looking to see Netflix do a piece on this as a documentary that does holistically the story rather than the drip by drip of what the Chinese are doing. I think most of the media, and the beauty of this subject, if there's any silver lining, is that it's bipartisan. Like I said, no one gives the keys to your house to have it robbed to the thieves. I mean, no one wants that to happen. I have faced no bipartisan, I mean, any partisan backlash, and it's been bipartisan in support. And that's true on the Hill. It's everywhere. It's are we ready to pay? It is we know from our careers, security is by definition somewhat inefficient. It's like the multi-factor authentication. I have to wait for the number. Well, yeah, but it's adding security to your login. That's why you have it. So that's the whole idea here. What is it that you want to have in place that protects your secrets at all costs and having your house protected from the thieves coming in and taking your property, which is ours?
Do you see any diplomatic pressure is working?
Diplomatic pressure works, but you have to be prepared to use it. And I find,
And yeah, I mean with force behind that or some,
yeah, with
yeah,
force behind it, but also stick to itives. You
right,
can't just back down. You have to do what you say you're going to do, and that's true across the spectrum of national security issues. And if you threaten to curtail these sales or impose these tariffs, but then immediately back down as a result of renewed back pressure on you, it erodes the confidence that you're really serious about it. The other thing that diplomatic pressure helps do is educate the public about it.
right.
Um, I'll give you an example, but I'm taking you to the UK. The approval by Prime Minister Starmer and his administration, but through Prime Minister Starmer before he went to Beijing 4 weeks ago, of the mega embassy in London being built by the Chinese, or the permissions to build the Chinese embassy there, or the chancery in London, is a good case in point. There was enormous pressure put on by the Chinese, and which side backed down? The British did. And so if you back down to China, there are consequences to it. And tragically, Jimmy Lai is still in prison. He didn't get released as a result of a give. I mean,
That's right.
let's be clear. Authoritarian regimes do not like compromise. They're fixated on their goals, and it's their goals at any cost. So this idea that just you can mouth one thing and act a different way or a lesser way than what you've stated verbally is again something that doesn't have any standing with the Chinese, and they'll just proceed. The other thing that we're seeing very clearly is the Chinese are very good at reprisals. You have to be prepared that if you call them out on stealing your trade secrets in a particular sector or in a particular area, they're going to come and close you down in China if you already are there as a market. They will come and they will make your life very difficult. They play hardball on this whole topic. Why? Because possession is 9/10 of the law. If they've already gotten you to where they want in the cage state, they do not want you breaking away. And they
Right.
will pay for you will pay for that in terms if you detect again the IP theft and that sort of thing.
We didn't touch on, say, criminal groups. Do you see them as also playing a role in this?
Look, the whole of society in China, and I'd have to, and you know this topic perhaps better than I do, the whole area of the precursor chemicals for fentanyl. So I'm a little bit off topic, but it has illustrative applications to this
Mhm.
issue as well. Is the criminal organizations may be very well behind the precursor being sent to Mexico for fentanyl.
Mhm.
The idea that the Chinese Communist Party does not have control or the ability to control that is ludicrous. Watch them during COVID, and you know they can close down entire mega cities. I mean, it's just not possible that they don't have it all the way down to the canton level in terms of party control. So this idea, or fears that they're violating, privacy and personal rights. I mean, that
Right.
just doesn't apply. So leveraging the criminal groups, and I'm not saying the CCP they're embedded in there and driving the CCP, but they're a force multiplier to the ends of the ends that the Chinese Communist Party is looking for. So that's kind of the way that I look at how those criminal elements are used.
You don't speak a lot about this in the book, but there is, of course, the university element here,
Yeah.
and the Confucius Institute. Finally, the FBI got somebody listened to them,
They got the
and
memo.
yeah,
Yes.
they got the memo on the Confucius Institutes, and
Yeah.
most of them and the universities mostly cut off their ties with that. Have the universities gotten smarter on this? Are they? I know there's a lot of conflicting priorities here, but do you think that we've actually moved in the right direction on this topic?
We're moving, but very slowly, and I'll tell you why. There are approximately, last count, about 280,000 Chinese students in the United States, all of which pay their full, um, tuition, room and board associated with being in the United States. Far be it from me to ever claim they're all Chinese spies. That's not what I'm saying. But once again, Article 7 of the 2017 intelligence law requires them to assist if called upon to the Chinese Communist Party. So academia is very reluctant to recognize, because in many ways they're financially compromised with the Chinese funding that comes through to them on the one hand, and on the other hand, joint research, who can be against it? Joint research is sort of the currency of the realm in academia, and so you would say that's just called cooperation. The problem with the latter is they'll take it all from you. So it's sort of looking at it in a sort of perverse kind of way is again, what are you going to protect on the campuses? And as you know, we have a history of campuses being fairly, shall we say, independent of U.S. government reach into them to tell them, what the rules of the game are in terms of how they will work with a nation state, in this case, China, when it comes to their advanced research work and that. So, I mean, I'm associated with, and I won't give the name, but one of the organizations I'm associated with has a very vibrant scholar program that taps this kind of expertise. And by and large, the universities, when it comes to background checks, do not want to work with the entity I'm associated with it's a government contractor, so it's not the government, but it's closely affiliated with that say we're not going to give you that personal data on our students that want to be scholars in that, or who their roommates are, or counterintelligence signatures that we would be interested in seeing for any kind of background search on them. And so that program in my location is moribund because they're not willing to work with you from academia. And so to me, A Dr. Leiber who was at Harvard as head of the chemistry bio department is now in Shanghai, being paid handsomely to do research, and there's apparently nothing that can be done about it. But he's materially contributing to the Chinese capabilities by what he's doing.
After having been convicted.
Having been, yes, exactly.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Thanks. There's a lot of great questions, and David's touching on a lot of them, and that I'm trying to summarize some of these here. But one of the things I'd like to ask though, and which is getting one's head around this question, when we've had these cyber attacks and they've taken information, and this gets back to the TikTok question too, gathering up all this data on American consumers, American citizens, government employees, maybe we tend to shrug it off, and we still are with TikTok to some extent. But but you see that as a problem. That's what I get from the book.
It's a huge problem, Michael. One of the incentives, and I would say maybe it's close to the top incentive for writing the book, was I'm still very angry that the Chinese stole 22.5 million dossiers from a security standpoint in the Office of Personnel and Management in May of 2015,
Right,
including yours and mine.
right.
Not amused by it. Do I have anything to hide? No, but I don't like them knowing all my contacts and family members that I had on the SF-86. For those who are not government people, that's the form that you have to fill out for your clearance and all that. They go on and they take 170 million records from Equifax, one of the three largest credit bureaus in the United States. Anthem Health and all their records. Target was a target was a target. And
Mhm.
you could go on and on. By now, every American has had some level of data compromise with China's removal of data from the United States that would have been otherwise protected data. I mean, I'm not just talking, what you're posting on LinkedIn, although they do send out 30,000 emails per hour from the LinkedIn access that they have in terms of targeting people and that. So they are using information ops very creatively around this. Now we get to more insidious sort of aspect of, say, a TikTok. And this is hearts and minds stuff. This is how they then begin to influence over time the positioning on the clicks associated with it, in addition to taking the TikTok data through the back door and the algorithms of ByteDance, the parent of TikTok, that give me grave concern. But so if you want to shape a certain outcome over time, you push narratives and you push a narrative that this group of people or this area of the country is bad and this other area is good. And it's really about fomenting distrust and friction as opposed to how do we find harmony among us? How do we bridge the political divide? They don't want to see a bridging of the political divide in the states. They want to see it actually accentuated. So information ops now become far more uh, manipulable because of the data that they have. And so to me, Michael, that's the even more nefarious aspect associated with data. And lastly, on data, imagine a world where they have all the genome data and DNA on you and me. I won't even mention the audience, just you and me.
Mhm.
Now they can map you. Now they develop a vaccine only for those who they will give it to, knowing full well it won't work on you and me. If or it will work on it, but they won't sell it to you and me.
Mhm.
So imagine that kind of control. And you say, oh, that's beyond Orwellian. That's beyond 1984. Well, who thought they'd do what they're doing now? So don't say never. It's possible if they could map your genome and DNA in a way to actually continue to manipulate around what they buy, what they sell to you, and what they're willing to buy from you. So that's kind of out into the future. I get that, but one
Right.
that really worries me.
We can let if we respond the way you think we ought to as as a country, and not just us, right? Because we're also this is our allies in the West who are being targeted. A lot of countries have the same problem we do. How do we know we're actually making progress on this? Is there a way for us to tell?
Well, um, there's a surreptitious way of knowing by how dedicated they are to try and steal it. So there's if you know they're going after quantum
Mhm.
at all costs, you know it's because one, they don't have what we might have, and how much they're attacking that. That's one way. That's a negative way of looking at finding out what they are looking for. Two, this is uh, Iran offensive operations. That is to try and penetrate and understand where their gaps are. And now I would be talking about CCP gaps in terms of their collection planning and all of that. Obviously, ideally, then operationalizing that to understand what the MSS is doing on how to get it and all that. That's the other way. So, good intelligence always gives you a decision advantage if you get it and it's reliable and all of that. So, I trust that the IC, I'm not in it anymore, is collecting on what the Chinese objectives are and how you make progress. Thirdly, you and I, no, I'll back up. I won't speak for you, Michael. I have long believed we overclassify. I think we need to be more transparent with the American people as to what the Chinese people are doing to us based on what we can observe. I'm not saying giving up sources and methods. How you learned it is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do you uh, uh, educate the American public, the Western public, about what this is all about. And I will give you a prima facie example. This book, the first time I've ever heard, didn't have a single word change in the pre-publication review. I pushed the
Interesting.
envelope. When you read the
Mhm.
MSS Labyrinth versus Western intelligence, US intelligence capability, there is a
Yes,
lot of information in there.
yes, yes.
You're contrasting it. They didn't change a word, a sentence, a thought. I got
Yeah,
it
that
cleared
struck me. That
without.
struck me too.
So it tells you, Michael, that there is a desire to want to tell this story by proxy, in my case, in writing the book with my co-author Andrew Badger, a case officer who worked for me, that we want to tell this story, but we love proxies telling it too. So they agreed to it. That's another measurable way of saying, what are we doing about it
This is our version
versus
of a
what they're doing to
thousand.
us.
This is our version of a thousand grains of sand,
Yeah,
right? It's not
exactly.
just the Chinese. It's not just the Chinese tactic and
We can use
strategy.
that too.
That's right.
Exactly.
So and I think that's a good way to end today. Thanks so much for introducing us to the subject. So speaking so eloquently about the book, and also giving us a little more. I found I read the book, but I found the way you put it together for us today actually was made it more profound to me. And thanks. And I also want to mention to our listeners that on March 18th, I'll be speaking in this Inside Intelligence with Dr. Kathleen Vogel, who wrote a book on how to basically how to improve intelligence analysis, how to avoid intelligence failures with Carl Ford Jr., who was a veteran of the
Right.
intelligence community for many, many years. So Kathleen Vogel will be with us next month and we're excited about that. Thank you very much, David, for being with us today. We hope to have you back soon when you're talking about something else.
Okay. I don't know if that'll be anytime soon in terms of talking about something
Yeah, it
else,
takes a
because
little
this,
while to get a book written,
yeah,
but I'm sure
right,
there's
right.
other things that'll come up.
But Michael, thank you for what you're doing to get the message out as well. And I really appreciate the invitation today and to your audience. And I hope it has the intended impact, which I share humbly to this audience. So thank you.
Thank you. And that's all we have for today for Inside Intelligence. Thanks everybody for being with us.